Welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast, addressing all aspects of the digital enterprise, inspiring connection without boundaries and creation without limits. Thank you for tuning in. Here are your hosts, Thom Singer and Craig Brown.
This is the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Thank you so much for picking this podcast, because I know there's a lot of podcasts out there, but you keep coming back week after week to where we have this show that we designed to be a resource for those who work in and around PLM. The Digital Enterprise Society is a forum for the exchange of ideas surrounding the tools, processes, and practices used across the product lifecycle. To learn more, visit digitalenterprisesociety.org. My name is Thom Singer, and I have the honor to co-host this show every single week with Craig Brown. Craig is an industry veteran and former PLM leader at General Motors. Hey, Craig, if it's Wednesday, we're back here with the podcast.
Hey, hi, Thom. It's good to hear your voice. And yes, we are. And, you know, it's like riding a bike. We just keep doing this over and over and over, and hopefully we're getting better at it. Today, we're going to talk a little bit differently about help for all you folks that are going through job transitions and how that all happens. And so there is a PLM play, and we'll talk a little bit about that with our guest.
Well, and we do a lot of episodes that are really focused on career development. In fact, Craig, some of those episodes, you're not even here with me. I'm interviewing experts on different things. But
there's a simple reason for that, Thom, and that is because my career is at its sunset. And so I'm not trying to find the next gig. I'm just trying to help all you guys out there.
But I always miss you when you're not here with me on an episode, because every single week, Craig and I try to bring to this podcast and all the listeners, we try to bring you interesting interviews and other ideas that are going to help you enhance and grow your career. And that's what today is all about. Today, we are joined by Bruce Singh. And Bruce is a practice director with Patina, a Korn Ferry company, where he works in business development and manages special projects. He also has an extreme passion and volunteers helping mid and high-level executive folks find ways to better their job search. So Bruce, welcome to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast.
It's great to be here. Well, thanks for having me.
We're glad to have you. So before you got involved with Patina and before your passion of helping people better their job search, give us a little bit of your background.
Yeah, sure. Spent a lot of years in the industrial world, a lot of it in the auto industry, most of it automotive tier one, and was very fortunate. I had an engineering education, but I also added an MBA. So I'm one of those dreaded MBAs that you and Craig talk about almost every week, as a matter of fact, because I listen to your podcast. But, you know, what I've really gotten to do is solve a lot of strategic problems. I've touched the business process associated with PLM and change management numerous times in my career. And really, towards the end of my career, I actually worked for one of the PLM vendors, PTC, and did some digital transformation work for Deloitte Consulting. So it's been a really interesting ride for me. I've been working almost 50 years, if you include my cooperative education time. And I wouldn't have done it any other way. Been very fortunate.
Well, Bruce, welcome to our show. I am doing my math. Let's see. Oh, yeah. You're like older than I am. That's good. I'm not quite yet at 50 years. It's close, because I started as a co-op when I was 19 years old. So
we're close.
Yeah, we're close. So you know, the cool thing about cooperative education, we'll go there for a second, is you get hands-on experience. And at least the university I went to, it was required. And that university has deep roots in PLM, because a lot of the companies here in the Midwest that formed and are now, well, even PTC, but also Siemens and others, they have their heritage somewhere here in the Midwest of the United States. So in any case, let's start out with a bang. Okay, so you got the MBA, you're an engineering trained bachelor's degree. You take the positive side. Why is that a good thing? And I'll take the negative side. And so, you know, Mark Pendergrass and I, when we chat, we we talk a bit about the wrong measures, right? And MBAs are really good. You're taught to figure out the key measure and then focus the business on it, right? So give me the positive, and I'll see if I can find a flaw in your argument. How about that?
Well, that's interesting. So what I think is the positive is that, everything's for a reason. And so, some of that additional education I got really helped me understand more about the wider business so that I could really relate, as well as help my team relate to why are we doing what we're doing.
Okay.
And, what I found is that even compared to my father, who had spent most of his career in engineering roles, smart man, but sometimes didn't quite understand or didn't have the context of why, things were the way they were. And I really felt that throughout my career, I was able to help my teams, especially when I was in technical leadership roles, understand what that crazy management directive, what was all that all about? And where did that come from? And what's the real thing we're trying to get done here and why?
Yeah, and that's a really good way to say it, because it's the real thing that sometimes changes, either because economics have changed it, or you and I, we're here in the Midwest and we both had our different roles in automotive. And the landscape of that has changed dramatically, right? I mean, there's another huge shift going on with electrification. And so I guess at the center of all that, how does PLM help? Because I do think it helps, but I think bringing an MBA view might actually be good as long as it's not just finance. And
sure.
And I think if you're beholden to a banker, well, that's a problem. But MBAs can be much broader. They should be much broader, right?
Oh, sure. And really, as I got to really evolve through my career, and as well as how PLM's tools evolved as well, what I saw is really a great way of documenting and communicating. So if you think about the basics of engineering, it's all about documentation, right? Because if you can't document what you're talking about, then what's the value? And how do you translate that value into something else that's tangible? And so it's a great way to house that documentation, make sure it's managed properly. Because the other thing that, I learned over time is that all those little crib sheets I used to have on the old steel case desk, that top shelf that they used to pull out, could be like a reference. They're great until something changes somewhere else. And did I change it on my little crib sheet? Yeah. Well, if there's only one source of truth that everybody keeps referring back to, the chances of errors and problems are much less.
Right.
And your chances of really being successful are much greater.
Well, yeah, that's one of the things PLM helped point out is how many failures are just about miscommunication.
That's right.
To your point, it's not about an understanding of the physics. It's about being sloppy and not being careful. And PLM, especially visualization things, can really help that. Engineers only bring value when they share their knowledge, right?
That's right.
And a lot of times people lose track of that. They got all these tools that help you design something faster, but if your peer next to you can't understand what you did, it doesn't really bring value.
Yeah, if someone else in the business can't do something with that,
right, then
it's not very valuable.
So you're now at Patina, right? If I said that properly, and you're helping others, a little younger than us who are in the job search, and thanks to the pandemic, a lot of people are finding themselves in a job search or thinking about a job search.
Right.
And of course, all the newspapers are saying, there's all kinds of jobs.
That's right.
Unemployment's, almost 3% or 3.5%. So why don't you help our listeners? If they leave their current job, is it easy to get another one? What should they be thinking about?
So, when I was thinking about, this particular type of question, it depends a lot on what you bring to the party at the end of the day.
Okay.
And one of the misconceptions that I see often is that people say, well, I'm in this job today, so I should be able to do that anywhere. Well, maybe yes, maybe no. the thing that I think about is you got to think about, and I look at this actually as a marketing problem. And it's what I call a big M marketing problem, because it takes into account all the different aspects of what we would call marketing. You've got to do the research and the market analysis to figure out, okay, what's the market looking for?
Yeah.
Right. You have to do the product management or product marketing job of figuring out, well, how do I package myself to be attractive to the market? And how do I price that? And what's relevant about me so I can at least to be considered? And then at the end of the day, you're going to be competing with other people. Well, how can you be compelling or more compelling than the next person? So those are all important aspects to think about. And then you've got to get out there and what I call manage accounts, which are potential employers. Well, you need to do that well. And then you've got to communicate to the market, well, what do you bring to the party? So those are all important aspects.
Bruce, you're reminding me that, and if you're an engineer, you're likely an introvert.
That's right.
And this is really difficult because
this is really hard stuff.
Like Thom, in order to do all this marketing stuff really well, and I don't know. I think it can be overwhelming, but I like your point about analogy to marketing. And if you're uncomfortable with that, well, then maybe you shouldn't quit your job, right?
That's right.
Over the years, I found different challenges at General Motors. A lot of them involve, using computers to do your job, using them more and more, and that's what led me to the PLM job eventually. But I think this thing about what do you do well, and does the market need that? I think that's really important. Markets change. That's the other thing that's maybe really unclear, is how markets are morphing, and they morph because of economies. They morph because of the current world events, and so some of that you got to be on top of. I think for all of us that might have been impacted by global sourcing and moving manufacturing around the world, guess what, everybody? It's coming back to our country, right? So, or at least our region of the world. And so a lot of the people, especially here in the industrial belts, that might have been affected by moving jobs overseas, you might get an opportunity now. I mean, maybe you'll advise the younger generation, but it's moving back. So that's a result of world events, and that's a different market than even 5 years ago.
That's right. And what you'll find is that the job search, just how you go about it, is different than it was 5 years ago. What's important is different. Right now, yes, there are a lot of openings, and there are a lot of people out, recruiters looking for people. And guess where they're looking? They're looking at LinkedIn. And if you're someone that said, I don't want a LinkedIn profile, well, that's how people find you. Yeah.
Actually, to LinkedIn's credit, they're becoming one of the better stable platforms for
that's
this
right.
connection. It's interesting. I got to hand it to those guys. They in this wild west of being connected socially via networks, even like what we're doing today, LinkedIn seems to have done it a bit better. So yeah, I'm one of those reluctant guys. I use LinkedIn because I have to, but I don't rely on it. And I'm fortunate enough that I'm able to do things like what we're doing today, right? Like we can just run a podcast and, make a recording. I don't have to go sell making podcasts, right?
Mm-hmm.
No, that's interesting. So give me the other, what are the biggest misconceptions that job seekers run into? And I mean, you mentioned the marketing side of it. Are there others?
Yeah. So I think the biggest misconception that I run into a lot is that people say, well, I just apply online and they'll love me and reach out to me. Isn't that right? And the reality is that, all those processes for talent acquisition that companies have, especially the big companies, but even smaller companies, they're really all designed around the whole thought that I'm going to get inundated with applications. And so they're designed to weed people out. And in some cases, the people that are trying to hire, the hiring managers, may not even know why the candidates are being weeded out. I was a hiring manager at a major corporation back in the early, I'll say about 10 years ago. And my job, the problem I was trying to solve, I had to staff up an engineering team fast. And so we had to hire like 110 engineers in a year. which is quite a few, given that we weren't in major metropolitan areas.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't have our technical centers there. There were smaller areas. And so, we would even take people we knew and say, please apply for this job. And we'd never see them. And we go to our HR business partners and they would go, well, we don't know why. So I said, well, please find out. And as they dug into it, they found out that corporate had some knockout questions in the tools that they hadn't set. And oh, by the way, they didn't even have authorization to change them.
Yeah, like a university from a particular degree from a
particular university, or
bizarre.
What's your desired salary, or all these things that were there that we didn't know about. And that's not a unique situation. So, if you're just going and applying online, as that's what I call going through the front door, today, for every maybe 50 you put in, you might hear one or two and have a screening call. Under normal times, it would be more like you put in 100-ish and maybe get a couple screening calls. And those are screening calls.
Yeah. You got it. Yeah, right. It's just the beginning of the process.
It's just the beginning of the process.
Yeah. Well, okay. So another angle, instead of going out there and going through the front door, as you mentioned, is to become a consultant, right?
Mm-hmm.
What's involved with that? I mean, I think I'm a consultant now, but I didn't knock on anybody's front door. I had the luxury of people calling me saying, hey, what are you doing? And you're not really retired, are you?
Well, and really that was your network, right?
Yeah, exactly. So if you're going to be a consultant, do you need a network? Maybe that's the answer.
Well, actually, especially if you're beyond entry level to find another job, you need a network, right? Okay. And that way you can kind of go in the side door, is what I call it, and find out, well, hey, Bob, you're working similar stuff than what I've done in the past. I mean, what's going on? Are there big problems? What you don't know in your typical situation is that posting may represent an opportunity, or it might not.
Right.
It might be just, well, they have to do it because that's part of their process to move John from position B to position A, and they got to go post it. And it's not really an opportunity.
Yeah.
And those are the kind of things that are the inside that the insiders, like, someone in your network might know that you can't possibly know from the outside.
Right.
And it's one of my colleagues. So the group I work with in job search is called T&G. And one of my colleagues there calls it the unknown and the unknowable.
Oh,
right?
Wow.
So and if you don't leverage your network, you're just not going to know.
Yeah.
Now, transitioning to consulting, okay, that's basically setting yourself up to provide your knowledge value in a different way, perhaps more in a project way versus having a role in a company. And you can do that as an independent consultant, where you're basically setting yourself up as a small business person, or you can do that as part of a consulting firm, which their job or their business is all about providing this knowledge in an easy format for a client to consume. And obviously, there's a lot that goes with that. There's so if you're going in that route, you're going to solve client problems based on that consulting company's processes, policies, procedures, and you'll be somewhat under pressure to stay engaged on client work, because generally in a consulting firm, there's no one that's really all about making sure that you're adding value and paying for yourself.
Yeah, that's really good insight. And I think, especially if you're, where we are in our careers, you can find the consulting gig, but it's short term,
right?
Right. And I've had a couple of clients through the other things that I'm doing part time, and they're all across the world, and they want to know, well, how'd you do it at the car company, right? And I'm like, well, in general, we can talk about it, but there's specifics you can't know,
right?
Right?
Well, that's right,
because it's the nature of competitive work. So yeah, it's interesting, but Are there downsides to consulting? I mean, I
Sure.
have my favorite, but you probably have a better summary of all. What are the downsides?
Well, so first of all, even if you're in a job, right, as you go further in your career, to be compelling to an employer, you've got to be able to solve. They have to believe you can solve a big problem they have. Otherwise, why would they bring you in?
Yeah. And especially if they're paying you top dollar.
That's right. If they're paying you top dollar. At some point,
that MBA guy is going to say, hey, we don't need them anymore.
Yeah, that's right. Well, to your point exactly, what I tell people is as you get more senior in your experience level, as well as senior in your chronological age, you're going to be old and expensive. And you're going to be compelling if you can solve a big problem. Now, once you've solved that problem, you're still old and expensive, but they don't have that problem anymore.
That's right.
So to your point, Craig, the MBA is going to say, that guy's too expensive. Get rid of him.
This might be why I have a negative view of MBAs. But to be honest, I think understanding that and what you described at the beginning, understanding that there are key measures and all companies at different points in their life cycle, they change what are the key measures.
That's right.
The faster you can figure out how you as an individual align to those key measures, that you can help solve it, or you're not interested. I mean, truly, if you're not interested, then don't pursue it, right? Because it's just going to lead to frustration. So,
and what happens is, in many cases, and I'm one of those, I had a career with General Motors in Delphi. I worked there 36 years. And then since then, I've worked a number of smaller stints with still major companies because I was brought in to solve a problem. And one way or the other, the politics change, the needs change, whatever it is, you find that you're old and expensive and they don't need you and you move on. And so to a degree, shifting to consulting, you're just, I'll say, facilitating that fact that you're going to solve a problem over a shorter period of time on kind of more of a project basis versus being an employee. Either one will work from a management perspective. Either one could solve that big problem. There are some things that are advantageous if you have an employee doing it versus an outside person doing it. And vice versa, there's some disadvantages because, like I said, when the company's done with you, well, then they have to figure out how do they move you on out the door.
So it seems to me to live a balanced, healthy life, that part of what we have to do as consultants or as seniors in our industry is have a different mindset, right? It's not about keeping this constant pay, constant benefit. Right. It's more about solving important problems, interesting problems that other people are having, and then being ready to move on to the next one.
That's right.
And oh, by the way, to give everybody listening some hope, Bruce and I are going about this different ways, but we're both finding plenty of problems to solve.
That's right.
And there are people willing to pay for your expertise. There are. So maybe as we wrap this up, give us some of your thoughts about it. It's not really hopeless, right? No. If you're in our position, decades at some companies, and now you're doing part-time work, there's a lot of it. And actually, there's a lot of demand for us. There really is.
That's absolutely true. And for instance, and it doesn't matter what your specialty is, the important thing is that you're compelling at something, right? That you solve problems that are valuable. That solution is valuable to somebody. And you have to be able to communicate that and talk about it. Because at the end of the day, whether you're an employee or whether you're a consultant, you have to market yourself as someone that can solve the big problem that they have.
And to your point about marketing earlier, and you have to know the research. You have to stay engaged.
That's right.
To know what kind of problems need to be solved. I mean, there are different problems, and the world events, as we sometimes talk about. My goodness, 2 months ago or 3 months ago, we wouldn't have been thinking about the armed conflict going on the other side of the planet.
That's right.
And yet, we have engineering skills that can solve problems, and business skills that can solve problems. So,
if you think about back to the PLM world, if you had a really contemporary, mature PLM that really captured all the product data, as well as could view it from all the different views that we can now do, whether that's the manufacturing view, whether that's the as-built view, whether that's the service view. Think about how much easier it would be to resource or set up a new plant to build whatever it is if you really had that all flushed out, including all the tooling, all the specifications, all the even marketing information like, packaging and advertising and service, all that. If you could just lift it and move it with all that information, just think about how much easier that would be.
And by the way, everybody, I'm sure there's some really good companies doing exactly that.
That's right.
And you can read about the silicon foundries. We've talked about it a couple of times on the show here. They're all moving back to North America. Today's headline was another one of the Korean manufacturers are moving to have a footprint of building chips here in the North American continent. It's funny. Bruce, you and I, we did some time in central Indiana, which has, and nobody knows this. Now, few people know there's a big IC foundry there. It's mothballed at the moment, but it could be used. It needs to be air cleaned up, I suppose. But anyways, so Bruce, this has been wonderful chatting with you, and thanks for your advice for different levels of folks and whether they're looking at finding a new job, and for us in our senior years, there's a plenty of consulting gigs. So thanks. Oh,
absolutely. Well, and one thing that I will say is, so if you're an independent consultant, you can bring value, but the important thing is making sure you have a pipeline of work to do. Right. And multiple channels to get that work through. So for instance, I work for Patina, and we are one of those channels. We put professionals on the ground to solve problems. They're always going to be someone that's got a lot of experience, because that's the only resources we will look at, and we will help you get that opportunity and help you through that opportunity, and as far as handling all the financial stuff and things like that.
Well, it's fascinating. That's why you're called Patina.
That's right.
I wondered at first why the name. I got it. So hey, Thom, back to you.
So Bruce, this was great. I love it anytime that these episodes are really giving people things they can take away and put into practice. And I think that your conversation with Craig really did that. In your work that you do with people who are in a job change, maybe they've been laid off, maybe for other reasons they've been separated for their company, what are some of the biggest, fears or roadblocks that people have to be able to jumpstart that search, whether it's for employment or whether it's to go do a consulting gig? What are some of the roadblocks and fears that people have, and then how can they knock those roadblocks down?
So the number one is don't take it personally. So the first time this happened to me, I remember I was even reluctant to walk into the local bagel shop because I thought I had this big label over my head said loser, right? And that's not true. It's not personal. It was a business decision. So don't get hung up on that. And the second thing is you have got to leverage your network. And one of the biggest issues there is, first of all, making sure you have one and you've invested in one. But the second one is feeling comfortable leveraging it and asking for help. And, I see it people all the time. They're just hesitant to start that. And the way I look at it, you don't start till you start.
Absolutely. So another thing that comes up is if people are getting a little more seasoned in their career and they're in the 50 plus world, lots of times they feel like, oh my God, I'm too old to ever find employment. And yet I see people all the time in their 50s, 60s. Companies are glad to have them because of the experience they bring, either as an employee or as a consultant. So what advice do you have for those people to get over themselves about being a little bit more seasoned gray?
Well, I think the important thing there is to stay current. Craig mentioned that before, and make sure that you understand and are fluent in the tools of business today. Zoom, Teams.
Yep.
These are not tough tools to use, but if you don't practice, you're not going to feel comfortable, and you have to be comfortable with them. They're phenomenal tools, and you can really leverage them to do a lot of things that were a lot harder in the past, and you've got to be comfortable doing that.
Well, Bruce, I think we could bring you back and talk more about this, because I have about 100 questions that I think our audience would love to talk about when it comes to, job search, career changes, really at any age, but certainly in that 50 plus area. However, we've reached the end of today's show. We're past that mark. And so thank you so much for joining us here on the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Any final thoughts?
My final thought is, you need to start investing in your network from the time you start your professional career. And, it is not natural. I think Craig mentioned it's not necessarily natural for everybody. But at the end of the day, if you started early, it builds over time. And, there will come a time when it will be of value to you, and you can be of value to others. And sometimes that time is fairly short. I mean, I happen to do my undergraduate education in an institution that is today Kettering University, that it was very natural for us to work together and very natural for us to network, because we all worked co-ops somewhere. At that time, it was somewhere in General Motors. And I came out of there with this huge network. You'll see the same thing. I've seen it, same thing for people that have gone to the military academies. It's just natural in those kind of environments. But it doesn't mean that in other educational environments you can't. It just means that you've got to know to do it.
Nice. And in fact, for everybody listening, you can go back. I think it's 2 episodes. I did a whole episode about the power and importance of your network just a couple weeks ago. That was the solo episode where I interviewed myself. So go back and check that one out. Hey, thanks again, Bruce, for being here. Craig, always good to see you. And thank you to everyone who joined us. Please be here next week, because we're going to bring you more thoughts, ideas, and actionable information in and around your career in product lifecycle management. Remember, the Digital Enterprise Society is the place for the exchange of ideas around digital manufacturing tools. Go check us out at digitalenterprisesociety.org.
You've been listening to the Digital Enterprise Society podcast. Learn more about what you've heard here today at digitalenterprisesociety.org. Join us again next week for more connection without boundaries and creation without limits.